Paramedics, what is the most traumatizing 911 call you've ever received? Everything about my job was perfect until I was assigned the overnight shift. It sounds cliche, but it started like every other shift. I showed up to the station, chatted with the other guys for a bit, and took my time getting changed until the evening crew showed up with my ambulance. We got hit with a call almost immediately, and it was about to ruin my life forever. 13 David, 1-3. David, respond to a motor vehicle accident. Acknowledge. I grabbed the radio as my partner began to drive. 13 David, 10-4. Turning onto the block about 3 minutes later, we were presented with a late model black Mercedes, whose front end was wrapped around the bottom of a light post at the corner of the intersection. The body of a young Hispanic male, probably around my age, was lying on the street on his side about 10 feet in front of the car, his face bloodied and jeans ripped open from the thigh down, exposing a deep gouge that exposed part of the muscle surrounding the femur. Without any EMS supplies, and this particular street being empty except for us, there wasn't too much that they could do. He was breathing, but blood was filling up his mouth. I started up the portable suction and began to clear his airway. That's about when things really started to hit the fan. "What the F?" I heard one of the cops exclaim from the car. I turned around and he was standing behind the car, trunk open, looking down, his hand around his mouth and his eyes as big as dinner plates. "You sick person," he started yelling at nobody in particular. "What is it? What's wrong?" his partner yelled as he made his way around the car. As soon as he got within sight of the trunk, his eyes also opened to an extent I didn't know was humanly possible. He stood there for a few seconds, then ran a few feet off to the sidewalk and began to vomit. "Hey!" my partner called out. I snapped back towards the patient, my partner starting to put on the cervical collar around the patient's neck. "I'll take care of this. See what the F is going on over there, will ya?" I nodded and jogged over, holding onto my radio as it bounced around. I slowed as I reached the end of the car and turned around, my gaze slowly heading down to see what had caused all this commotion, and my stare was met with faces. Human faces in 3 orderly rows lined the trunk of the car. No body, no eyes, no tongue, no teeth, just disembodied faces, holes where their eyes should be, their mouths gently open in a scream forever silenced by the fact that they had no vocal cords. Some had hair, while others ended halfway up the forehead. "What the F?" was all I managed to whisper out. "He frickin' killed him," the cop spoke with just a hint of a whimper. "I cut him off and he frickin' killed him," he said a bit louder. I looked over at the cop. Surprise and disgust had been replaced by rage. "What do you mean?" I managed to get out before the sound of a gun coming out of its holster shut me up. "What the F do you think you're doing?" the other officer choked out, still coughing up bits of vomit. His partner didn't respond, just started walking over to the victim my partner was still tending to. "I could use a hand over here." He turned towards us only to see the barrel of a gun pointed in his face. "Step away," the cop calmly said. Slowly and with his gloved hands up, he complied. The cop reached down, grabbing the patient by the collar and started violently shaking him. "Why did you do it, huh? Why the F did you do it?" the cop screamed, only to be met with bubbles escaping from the patient's increasingly blood-filled mouth. His eyes opened halfway. He seemed to be alert enough to focus on the officer in front of him. His hands made a feeble effort to grab the cop's hands, but his injuries were far too severe to even lift up his hands that high, let alone force the officer off of him. "F you, you son of a gun," the cop said, and raised his gun to the patient's forehead. It was at this point, out of nowhere, his partner dove into him, wrestling for the gun. I guess the first cop wasn't expecting it because the gun came out of his hand pretty easily. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. Enraged, he grabbed his partner by the collar and tossed him away towards the car. In one swift motion, he turned around towards the patient, grabbed his nightstick, held it high over his head in one hand while holding the patient's collar in the other, and after the slightest pause, brought it down on the patient's head. His skull gave way to the baton, filling the street with a wave of blood. A small gurgling as he exhaled his last breath, and then nothing. His arms began convulsing inward in what is known as decorticate posturing, and 2 more quick hits with the baton finally gave him rest. The cop dropped the nightstick to his side, stumbled up and looked around. His partner was back to dry heaving on the other side of the street, and my partner and I stood in silence in front of the ambulance. The officer calmly walked over the sidewalk, sat down, put his head in his hands, and began crying. After a few seconds, my partner slowly went inside the ambulance and called for additional police officers and an EMS supervisor to respond to the scene. As it was later explained to me, the car was stolen earlier in the night from downtown, near 14th Street. It belonged to a doctor who worked at the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary. Apparently, he had brought human specimens in from his research lab at NYU to use in a lecture to new doctors at the hospital. After he had finished loading them into his trunk, he was assaulted from behind by the patient, who then stole the car and drove it uptown. One of those specimens was the biological father of the cop who responded to the call. The father was diagnosed with late-stage cancer and had agreed to donate his body to science after his death. This was all unknown to the cop, who had cut all ties with his father years ago due to his drinking problems and abusiveness towards him and his siblings when they were younger. You can imagine what the cop thought when he opened the trunk only to see his father's lifeless face lying there. I never saw that officer again after that. I saw his partner a few times, but he always looked tired and worn out. After a few months, I stopped seeing him too. I never heard of anything ever coming of this. I checked the paper every day for several weeks after this to see if the officer was arrested, but the only article concerning the call was a small blurb that talked about a single car accident that occurred uptown in the middle of the night that killed the driver instantly. I expected to get a call from the DA or IA asking me what had happened, but that call never came. I never brought it up again, and even now, years later, I sometimes wish that I had spoken up, that I had tried to stop the cop, that I had radioed for help earlier, that I had been more vocal with the cops that had shown up afterwards. But then I remember what my old partner had told me before any of this had happened. Be careful what you wish for.